Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and we're reading and discussing the book, The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson, a one-time Secretary of the U.S. Navy, astutely trained to assess threats to our Protestant Republican form of government, threats both foreign and domestic. And he assessed both foreign and domestic, and found them united in the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church. The papacy being the foreign threat, and Roman Catholicism being the internal threat, the domestic threat. And he is currently speaking about this Monsignor Seeger, who is writing a widely distributed series of essays and tracts condemning Protestantism and our Protestant form of government that allows to the people the right to govern when the people should be governed by the Pope, and that we should not have the freedom of speech when our speech contradicts that of the Pope, and we should not have the freedom of the press when the press contradicts the authority of the Pope. In concert with Pope Pius IX's encyclical and syllabus of error, when the Pope denounced the United States as a heretical nation, out of the will of the Pope, heretical and rebellious, being Protestant in nature, liberal in nature, had shaken loose the bonds of papal control and thought arrogantly to rule itself, independent of papal canon law. Monsignor Seeger instructs the Roman Catholics now how they should live. And we're backing up a few paragraphs from where we ended yesterday for continuity purposes. We're in the first paragraph, the first full paragraph on page 79, if you're reading along. It's about a third of the way down the page 79. He lays down the law for Roman Catholics in this country. He said the first rule is that we should receive both the text and the interpretation of the Scriptures from the legitimate pastors of the Roman Catholic Church and from them alone. Unquote. So what does that do to Protestantism? It goes right to the heart. The destruction of Protestantism. This is what it's all about. And he said, but he does not leave the object which prompts the suppression of the free circulation and perusal of the Scriptures to go unexplained. For example, in one place he says, quote, the Protestant Bible is only a false skin in which infidelity and revolution wrap themselves, unquote. So your Protestant Bible is a cover for rebellion and infidelity. Now I want to ask the question, is my authorized King James Version a rebellion against Christ or a rebellion against the Pope? My Protestant Bible, if understood clearly, describes the papacy as the biblical and historical Antichrist, and history confirms it. No wonder the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church hate the Bible so much and condemn those who read it and believe it and live it. And it says that by these gradual approaches, he, Monsignor Seeger, like a skillful commander, reaches his ultimate object, never absent from his mind, which is to show to those Roman Catholics in whom his book is especially addressed what the papacy expects of them in their conduct toward Protestantism. Okay? The domestic threat, domestic Roman Catholics, what should they do in respect to their conduct toward Protestantism? They are required to resist and oppose it because it teaches, quote, infidelity and revolution, unquote, which are wrapped up in the Protestant Bible. Thus, fixing his premise and preparing his readers for the avowal, he ventures upon these bold and reckless assertions which are made the more important by their repetition in the United States. Quote, wherever Protestantism has a sway, it is, believe this or not, here's what he said. I'm sorry. This is just insane. He says, wherever Protestantism has a sway, it is intolerant and persecuting. Imagine somebody from the Roman Catholic Church, a Monsignor no less, of the Roman Catholic Church, denouncing Protestantism as intolerant and persecuting. Somebody show me the Fox's Book of Martyrs against Protestantism, will you? How many lives has Protestantism claimed? How many tortures has it leveled? How many inquisitions? How many world wars? How many civil wars has Protestantism inflicted upon the world compared to the Roman Catholic Church? It's a ludicrous assertion that Protestantism is persecuting. Nonsense. But that's what Monsignor Seeger, this most elevated Monsignor of the Roman Catholic Church, a Roman Catholic hierarch, a prelate of the Church of Rome, instructs Roman Catholics to believe that Protestantism is intolerant and persecuting. Here he is, a Roman Catholic living in a Protestant country, acknowledging the United States as a Protestant country, but he's free to denounce Protestantism. Nobody's threatening to put him on the rack for denouncing Protestantism. Nobody's threatening to drive bamboo shoots under his fingernails or crush his tibia and his fibula with a very creative iron crushing mechanism, stretching him on the rack or waterboarding him for opening his mouth against Protestantism. But if you do that against the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and the days to which we are rapidly approaching, that is what's going to happen. One may not criticize the Pope or his kings. There is no toleration or tolerance at all for anything not popish. Now, it says, of course, not everything in the same degree, but why not? Because it does not possess everywhere. Speaking of Protestantism, because Protestantism does not possess everywhere the same degree of power. To persecute, one must both have the will and the power. Fortunately, Protestantism cannot always act as it has a mind to, says Seeger. But let it be said boldly, in fact, of intolerance. Protestantism will always go as far as it will dare. You talk about calling the pot, the pot calling the kettle black. Anyway, he continues, artfully and Jesuitically injecting this poison of malignant falsehood into the minds of the passive subjects of the papacy, Monsignor Seeger would, of course, leave his work but half accomplished if he failed to suggest to them in what spirit and in what temper this hideous and deformed monster of Protestantism, as he paints it, to be dealt with wheresoever it dares to set up its illegitimate authority against that of the Holy See of Rome. He is entitled to the credit of doing it without disguise as follows. Quote, the Catholic Church is certainly intolerant in matters of doctrine. True, and we glory in it. Truth is, of itself, intolerant. What is false is false. No compromise between truth and error. Truth cannot compromise. Such concessions, however small, would prove an immediate destruction of truth. 2 and 2 make 4. It is a truth. Hence, whoever asserts the contrary utters a falsehood. Let it be an error of 1,000th or 1,000,000th part, it will ever be false to assert that 2 and 2 do not make 4. Quoting further, he said, The Church proclaims, that is, the Roman Catholic Church proclaims and maintains truth as certain as the mathematical ones. She teaches and defends truth with as much intolerance as the science of mathematics defends hers. And what more logical? The Catholic Church alone, in the midst of so many different sects, avers the possession of absolute truth, out of which there cannot be true Christianity. She alone has the right to be. She alone must be intolerant. She alone will and must say, and she has said all through the ages in her councils, quote, if anyone saith or believeth contrary to what I teach, that is, the Roman Catholic Church teaches, which is truth, let him be anathema. So here we have this same Roman Catholic prelate, Monsignor Seeger, who condemns Protestantism as intolerant and persecuting, proclaiming the intolerance of the Roman Catholic Church. That if you belong to a church outside of the Roman Catholic Church, heaven's gates will be closed to you. Now it says, what more distinct and emphatic avowal could be made of the intolerance and aggressiveness of the papacy, of its settled purpose to remove from its path everything that blocks its progress toward universal dominion? Universal dominion. It fixes its curse upon every adversary and hounds on the slaves who do the bidding of its hierarchy, resolved upon no compromise, but only upon such a triumph as shall make its victory, if won, both final and complete. Therefore, this reverend libeler of Protestantism, as one of the generals of its great army, seemingly in anticipation of such a triumph, passes on one step further, that he may develop more minutely the contemplated plan of operations and show some of the effective instrumentalities which are to be employed in the more practical exhibition of intolerance, so that the avowal may excite in the minds of the timid and cowardly a wholesome dread of papal authority. After stating that the Spanish Inquisition was established by the Roman Catholic governments as an quote-unquote ecclesiastical institution, and thus agreeing that it had the sanction and approbation of the Roman Catholic Church, he proceeds, quote, that institution you may value as you choose. You are at liberty to condemn the abuses and the cruelties of which it has been guilty through the violence of political passions and the character of the Spaniard. Yet one cannot acknowledge in the terrible part taken by the clergy, one cannot but acknowledge in the terrible part taken by the clergy in its trials, listen to this, the most legitimate and the most natural exercise of ecclesiastical authority. He's simply saying, just overlook for a minute the cruelties that were inflicted. It was a Roman Catholic Church institution put in place by the Spaniard government, and it was the most legitimate and most natural exercise of ecclesiastical authority. The Spanish Inquisition. Unbelievable. Rome has never repudiated the Inquisitions. Rome believed it was her divine duty to rout out heresy and to kill heretics. She has never apologized for one drop of blood she's ever spilt. She believes that she has God's authority and sanction for her killing. That she kills in the name of God. She tortures in the name of God. She dismembers and debilitates, maims and mangles, strangles and drowns people in the name of God. And it's justified because she believes she's doing God's service. Now, this language is so plain and explicit that there's no room for doubt about its import. Its meaning is sufficiently seen without any straining of the most ordinary rules of interpretation. It was not designed for Protestant readers, but was avowedly and expressively addressed to those who were supposed to be ready and willing listeners to the words of authority, to such as tamely and submissively put their manhood into the keeping of ecclesiastical superiors, the Spanish Inquisition. Is there any reader so ignorant that he needs to be told what it was? Of all the institutions ever known to the world or ever invented by human ingenuity, it was the most cruel, oppressive, and bloodthirsty. Its thousands of victims, no, its hundreds of millions of victims, whose bones were crushed with its accursed instruments of torture, and whose groans made its priestly officials laugh with the joy akin to that of the fiends of hell, still cry out from their tombs against it. And the author gives us a note here at this point. He speaks of John Antoine Lorente, who was Secretary of the Inquisition in Spain, and when the institution was suppressed in 1809, 10, and 11, all of the archives of the Inquisition were placed at his disposal. These consisted of the unpublished manuscripts and papers mentioned in the inventories of deceased inquisitors. They were carefully examined and furnished him much of the valuable information communicated in his published Histories of the Inquisition. He says that the horrid conduct of this quote-unquote holy office weakened the power and diminished the population of Spain. Yes, it was so bloodthirsty that it actually diminished the population of Spain noticeably. Listen, that means when you walk down the street, you notice that there's not as many people on the street in downtown Main Street, Spain. Okay, it diminished the population of Spain by arresting the progress of arts, sciences, and industry and commerce. All of these were affected by the number of people killed in Spain, the number of God's people killed in Spain for throwing up objections to the papacy and its Roman Catholic government. They depleted the population so much that it halted the progress of the arts, sciences, and industry and commerce. And by compelling multitudes of families to abandon the kingdom, people left Spain in droves in fear of the Inquisition. And it says, by instigating the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors, and by immolating on its flaming shambles more than 300,000 victims. 300,000. That's 1/10 the population of the United States today. Okay? A lot of people died in Spain. And Rome has never apologized for one drop of their blood. It says he traces the history with great minuteness of detail, showing its introduction into Aragon during the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella, the punishment of the Albigenses and the Jews by its cruelties, its approval by Pope Sextus IV, Innocent VIII, and others as the means of augmenting their power, and gives the harsh and unprecedented rules of procedure by which it was governed. One of those rules shows how necessary it was considered to the papacy, that is, the Inquisition, how necessary the Inquisition was considered by the papacy, and that it was employed by the that's how they called them, reverend inquisitors, both as a religious and a political institution. Remember, the Roman Catholic Church insists that the state and the church be united, that the state be the instrument of torture against heretics in their nation by order of the Pope. Now look, if the Pope ever gains the necessary power and influence in this country, it will command the government of the United States to kill Bible-believing Christians and anybody who throws up an offense against the government of the United States or the Pope over which it is ruled. That's just history repeating itself. It's nothing new. We should all know about it. But this history has been held from us. We no longer think about these things. Most people, when they bring up the subject, think it's a waste of time. We're in more modern, more civilized age, and we don't need to be talking about the Inquisition anymore. Well, I'm sorry. That is about to change in this country. He continues with the note. He says, it required all witnesses to be asked in general terms, quote, if they had ever seen or heard anything that was or appeared contrary to the Catholic faith or the rights of the Inquisition, unquote. Again, from Llorente's History of the Inquisition, and it gives the recitation, page 60. It gives the reference, so you can look it up for yourself if you have a copy of this. It was characterized by the question, have you ever seen anything or anybody opposed to the Pope or the Inquisition? That's all it took to get somebody arrested and sent to the Inquisition for interrogation and torture. Those are the days to which we are rapidly approaching in this country. Now, the author continues with the text. He says, yet in the 19th century, while humanity has not ceased to shudder at the thought of its possible revival, the press of an American publishing house sends forth among the adherents of Roman Catholicism in the United States, with the sanction and approval of the Roman Catholic Bishop of Boston, the startling avowal that this horrible instrument of persecution, the Holy Roman Inquisition, is, quote, the most legitimate and most natural exercise of ecclesiastical authority. And more than one of the Roman Catholic journals in the United States have taken extraordinary pains to commend the book in which this avowal is made to their readers. The Boston Pilot, a paper of large circulation, thus advertises this book in its issue of February 20th, 1970, quote, plain talk about Protestantism of today. Everybody is buying it. Prices, neatly bound, 60 cents. In paper covers, 25 cents. By the hundred for distribution, $15. Send for copies to distribute among your neighbors. Unquote. Here, the design in republishing this book in the United States is made evident, that it shall, incendiary-like, make its way over the land by being brought within the reach and the means of all papal followers who can read it, so that they may be inoculated insensibly with the views and opinions of their ecclesiastical superiors, to be thereby fitted for whatsoever work they shall be called upon to do. There are very few Protestants who observe these cautious and stealthy approaches of their vigil, of their vigilant and sleepless adversary. Many of them engaged in pursuits which invite them into other fields of inquiry, and always tolerant and unsuspecting, are unwilling to rest long enough from their active occupations to pay any attention whatsoever to these things. And that's the condition today. Protestants are asleep. They don't know who their enemy is. They don't know what the greatest threat to their faith and their Republican form of government is. It's the Roman Catholic Church and a revived Holy Roman Inquisition right here in Protestant America. Monsignor Seeger has just condemned Protestantism as being intolerant and persecuting. And R.W. Thompson is saying that the Protestants of America are mindless of Roman Catholicism. They don't even think about it. They're busy with the average, ordinary, run-of-the-mill activities of daily life. They never suspect the Roman Catholic Church. R.W. Thompson is writing this book to wake up Protestants to Roman Catholicism and what a threat it poses to both their religion and to their form of government, their entire country's foundation. And he's having difficulty waking up Protestants. They're mindless of this thing. And as we are today, this book is very appropriate today. Now, how can Protestantism rightly be called intolerant and persecuting if we're completely mindless of the threat of Roman Catholicism in the country? But that's the way it existed. Here, in this published book by Monsignor Seeger, republished in the United States, it was intended to incendiary-like make its way over the land by being brought within the reach and means of all papal followers, every Roman Catholic who can read it, so that they may be inoculated insensibly with the views and opinions of their ecclesiastical superiors and be thereby fitted for whatsoever work they shall be called upon to do. What are we talking about? The overthrow of the government and the persecution of Protestantism. That's called persecution and intolerance, isn't it? The whole thing is preaching intolerance for Protestantism and the persecution of Protestantism. And he says there are very few Protestants who observe these cautious and stealthy approaches of their vigilant and sleepless adversary, Roman Catholicism. Many of them engaged in pursuits which invite them into other fields of inquiry, and always tolerant and unsuspecting, are unwilling to rest long enough from their active occupations to pay any attention whatsoever to these things. And very few, if they think of them at all, ever think of looking into the Roman Catholic books and newspapers to see what they contain. The Protestants are asleep, unsuspecting of Roman Catholicism. They don't think about it. They go on about their daily lives. Intolerant and persecuting? And it says, in the papal hierarchy, fully informed of all of this, and well knowing the advantage they derive from it, that is, the sleepiness of Protestants, employ all their intellectual energies and the most active and untiring industry in prosecuting their attack upon the religion professed by Protestants and upon all the liberalizing tendencies of the civil institutions which have grown out of Protestantism. That means our form of government and our Constitution. And it says, in their numerous publications they display great learning and ingenuity, but there are very few of these publications characterized by that charity which the Apostle Paul has placed among the highest virtues, and which Christ, by his life and teachings, inculcated as one of the chief and the most necessary duties of man. Hence, Monsignor Seeger goes on to say, in the imagined supremacy and superiority of the Roman Catholic hierarchy to which he belongs, and by whose ordinate ambition he is stimulated, quote, it would be an insult to the Catholic clergy to compare with them the pastors of Protestant sects. As Protestantism is no religion, whatever they may say to the contrary, so its ministers have not the authority of the priesthood, no matter how hard they may try to have its appearance, unquote. This denial of the priestly character of the Protestant clergy amounts of itself to but little, consisting as it does one of the most ordinary features of polemic controversy. But included within it is the denial of any religion to Protestants. And this accusation of heresy is designed by its frequent repetition in the United States as the foundation upon which to build the papal superstructure to bring about the downfall of our Protestant system and the erection of the Roman Catholic system in its place, in all its exclusiveness and power. And I will add, and persecutions. Yet these Yet those engaged in this undertaking do not fail to see that Protestantism in this country has a signal advantage over them in its advocacy of the freedom of thought, for which most of mankind, in spite of tyranny, have a natural yearning. And seeing this, they are employing this little book of Monsignor Seeger as the agent by which they hope to remove this difficulty out of the way, so as to secure a clear field for the future triumph and the operations of the papacy. It is not proposed to do this by argument or by any appeal to the intelligent reason, for in such a field they would meet inevitable failure, but by employing that dogmatism which allows no denial and which has hitherto served them well, so well in other times and countries. Monsignor Seeger cuts the thread with a single swoop of his ecclesiastical saber this way. He said, quote, "The freedom of thinking is simply nonsense. We are no more free to think without rule than we are to act without one. Unless we prefer to be disorderly and incur damnation, we are bound to have thoughts of truth and truth alone, just as we are bound to do what is right and only what is right," unquote. And at another place he says, quote, "Freedom of thought is the soul of Protestantism. It is likewise the soul of modern rationalistic philosophy. It is one of those impossibilities which only the levity of a superficial reason can regard as admissible. But a sound mind that does not feed on empty words looks upon this freedom of thought only as simply absurd, and what is worse, as sinful," unquote. Did you know the Roman Catholic Church forbids freedom of thought? You ever hear the expression thought police? There's no greater thought policeman in the world than the Roman Catholic Church. We're all taught that it's wrong to be a thought police, right? That we ought to be free to think, reason. Not in a Roman Catholic country, you don't. You simply believe as you are taught by the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. So you just check your brain and your Bible at the door, and you do as you're told, because the Pope is the end-all and be-all of Christianity. He is the fountain of truth by divine right. So there's no need for you to think. You are to live your life as a cadaver and simply be moved around like the stick in the hand of an old man. That's ultramontane Roman Catholic Christianity. It cannot be called Christianity, not in any serious mind. It calls itself Christianity. And the world hearing that just turns a blind eye to it. It's no threat if it's Christianity, right? Now, every reader accustomed to every reader accustomed to construe the simplest language can see that from these extracts, at a single glance, their full import. Therefore, without stopping here to comment upon them, it is sufficient only to say that besides assailing Protestant Christianity, they are an open and undisguised attack upon the chief cornerstone of our political institutions. These not merely secure to every American citizen the right of free thought, but recognize it as inalienable. If this great principle had not been maintained, our institutions could not have existed, and the theory of self-government would have been a disastrous failure. But by these papal teachings, and in direct opposition to this principle, the Roman Catholic citizens of the United States are commanded to regard it as absurd and sinful, and therefore in violation of God's law, as an odious and intolerable form of heresy, which is offensive to the papacy. They are thus instructed that they may be that they may be prepared to perform the religious duty of uprooting and eradicating all the constitutional guarantees designed for the protection of this principle, that is, because freedom of thought is the soul of Protestantism, and Protestantism has an open Bible in which infidelity and revolution wrap themselves. There should, after this, be no further denial of the fact that the papacy does not assert for itself, and that its devotees, that the papacy does assert for itself, and that its devotees maintain for it the divine power to teach political as well as religious truth. We shall see hereafter many evidences of this, and of the most convincing character, but this author does not leave us any room for doubt upon the subject, understanding perfectly well as he does that its ultimate end can be reached in no other way. After asserting that such freedom as the Protestants confer will lead to perdition unless controlled by the divine teachings of Christ and that of his Roman Catholic Church, that is, the Pope, and through his bishops and the clergy, he continues by saying, quote, "The authority of the Roman Catholic Church is a guard over human understanding in whatever directly or indirectly affects religion, which means in every kind of doctrine, religious, philosophical, scientific, and political arenas," etc., etc., etc. The Roman Catholic Church is the guard over human understanding, and that whatever directly or indirectly affects religion or doctrine or philosophy or science or politics is the domain of the papacy and the Roman Catholic Curia. That's your entire life. From cradle to grave, you are to obey the Pope and his church in every aspect of your life. Now, no apology is offered for these numerous extracts from this book of Monsignor Seeger, since it is supposed that the opinions of the author can be better made known by means of them than by briefer quotations, and because in order to convey a proper idea of what constitutes Roman Catholic literature in the United States, equally liberal quotations must be made from other papal authors. This book is introduced here on account of the great exertions made to secure it a large circulation, and of the most significant fact that it is considered worthy of the special endorsements of the Bishop of Boston, which gives to it the sanction of official authority. But it is by no means sent out alone. A crusade requires a large army, composed of many and disciplined soldiers, and supplied with the necessary weapons of warfare. This press is an ever-acting engine of power, and being free in this country, without regard to what it teaches, that part of it which moves or halts at the bidding of ecclesiastical authority continues its ceaseless efforts day and night to erect upon the ruins of Protestantism the imperial throne of papal power and absolutism by keeping up the supply of these necessary weapons. That's a wholesale condemnation of the press in this country for distributing among the people the ultimatum. That's how the press is used today, to indoctrinate the people. Listen, how many times up and down the mainstream media have you ever heard anything critical of the Roman Catholic Church or suggestive that it is trying to overthrow our democratic form of government, our republican form of government? How many times in the mainstream media have you dialed around from frequency to frequency, channel to channel, and hear some talking head say, the Roman Catholic Church has infiltrated the Protestant churches and seeks to destroy Protestantism through ecumenism? Can you name me one? Instead, we're taught to fight crusades. Nothing negative may be said about the crusades of the United States against the heretics in the Muslim world. The press is controlled, and it's Roman Catholic in character. No one in the mainstream media or much of the alternative media is warning about the Roman attack of our Protestant institutions. It's always placed in terms of liberal versus conservative, never in terms of Catholic versus Protestant. And the religious motive behind what's happening in the world is never discussed. R.W. Thompson was astutely aware of it, and that's why he wrote this book. He continues, he says, there is in the city of New York a publication society which sends out thousands, perhaps millions of little tracts of only a few pages, all devoted to the same subject, the defense of the papacy, and stamped with this badge of authority, quote, printed for the Catholic Publication Society, 9 Warren Street, New York, priced 50 cents per 100 and sold in all Catholic bookstores at the same price, unquote. A package of these tracts, easily procured, was found to contain one numbered 46 on the subject of the Pope's temporal power, defining what it is and what the faithful are required to believe in reference to it. It goes out in this modest and unobtrusive way that it may perform its allotted task silently and unseen, unless accidentally, by a single Protestant eye. Explaining what this power has hitherto been at Rome, we're speaking of the temporal power of the Pope, the Caesarian power of the Pope, the kingly power of the Pope, his power over the secular government, let's say. Explaining what this temporal power has hitherto been at Rome, it says that all the members of the church are bound, that's right, they are bound to believe that the Holy Father, the Pope, should enjoy that political independence which is necessary for the free exercise of his spiritual authority throughout the entire world, unquote. There's your New World Order, bound up in one sentence. Roman Catholics are bound to believe that their Pope should enjoy that political independence which is necessary for the free exercise of his spiritual authority throughout the entire world, conveying thereby the idea that as, quote, political independence is necessary to the free exercise of the Pope's authority at Rome, it is therefore equally necessary wherever throughout the entire world that the authority shall be recognized. In other words, that the degree of this independence must be the same everywhere, and as the Pope cannot maintain his full authority at Rome without it, so he cannot in the United States. It then proceeds in the form of question and answers to present the matter practically as follows. Listen to this. How can this independence be secured? Only one way. The Pope must be a sovereign himself. No temporal prince, whether emperor or king or president, or any legislative body, can have any lawful jurisdiction over the Pope. What right has the Pope to be independent of every civil ruler? He has it in virtue of his dignity as the vicar of Christ. Christ himself as King of Kings. But the Pope governs the church in the name of Christ and his representative. His divine office, therefore, makes him superior to every political, temporal, and human government. But cannot the Pope exercise his spiritual supremacy and yet be the subject of some temporal prince, for instance, the King of Italy? Most certainly not, for as the representative of God, the Pope is compelled to denounce whatever injustice and iniquity he finds in the world, including the acts of grasping and unjust civil governments, unquote. The Pope must be free of any constraint. That's the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the supreme ruling authority in the world, the supreme court of the world. No one may bring him to task. He is to be obeyed unquestioningly because he is Christ on earth. That's the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if you hear any Roman Catholic denounce any of this, it's only for matters of expedience. At all costs, they must not raise Protestant suspicion that their conquest of the United States must be done gradually. And that's what is done in Washington, D.C. Now let the reader observe how carefully this language is arranged so as to convey this obvious meaning. Nothing more, nothing less, that as the Pope's spiritual authority cannot be exercised in the Papal States without political independence, and as he must be superior to every political, temporal, and human government, so that he may denounce whatever injustice or iniquity he finds in the world, accordingly as he shall consider it unjust and iniquitous. Therefore he must have the same degree of political independence in the United States that he has in Rome, so that his command shall be as much the law here as there, and that he has already denounced Protestantism as heresy, infidelity, and no religion, as injustice and iniquity. He should have full authority to command that its institutions, that is, Protestant institutions, both civil and religious, when not approved by him, shall be plucked up by the roots, and all the power necessary to enforce obedience to such a decree. So what is the target? The target of the papacy is Protestantism and all of its Protestant institutions, right down to our very Constitution. If any doubt should be entertained on this subject, it'll be removed by the perusal of another of the tracts contained in this same package and numbered 43, upon the duty of obeying the Pope. Here, the duty of all Catholics to obey the Pope is laid down as the starting point. All his laws are represented as confirmed by a divine sanction and are obligatory upon the conscience in the same manner as the laws of Moses were binding upon the Jews. He is called the sovereign judge and lawgiver, and whose decisions and judgments there is no appeal. Being the head of the whole church and the father and teacher of all Christians, he, the Pope, requires therefore obedience to his doctrinal decisions and to his laws, in certain cases under the penalty of excommunication. All this having been announced, this little tract proceeds to define this extraordinary authority this way. It says, the authority of the Pope to teach and command the faithful in regard to all things relating to the doctrines which they are to hold and reject, are in regard to all things relating to religious and moral acts which they are to do or avoid, has been given him by Jesus Christ. Unquote. Thereupon the faithful are instructed that the popes, exercising the divine power of the keys, have forbidden certain opinions to be maintained and certain acts to be done, and that these commands are ratified in heaven and are therefore to be respected and obeyed as really emanating from Jesus Christ himself. Then, passing from this blasphemous comparison of the Pope with Jesus Christ, it condemns Freemasonry, as already under the curse of several popes before the present one, denies the right of a private person to judge the rulers of the church, and thus asserts full official impunity for every member of the hierarchy, endeavors with an exceedingly thin veil of sophistry to evade the charge of ecclesiastical interference with political opinions. We've run out of time. Obviously, he has a better opinion of Freemasonry than I do, but we'll retrace a little bit of our steps tomorrow on the broadcast and bring this all into perspective.